All right, I'm gonna jump into things. Howdy, everyone. Happy Friday. Please make sure to fill in the sign-in form if and when you get a chance before the end of the night. Um, this week is just a review week, so I am happy to spend as long as we would like on any topics that you would like to cover some extra examples for, anything that's a little confusing, or anything unrelated that you just want to talk about. That's primarily what this week is for. If we run out of stuff to talk about, then I have some backup stuff that we can do, but up to you guys. All right. Hearing nothing, we will jump into a separate discussion about how you can run your React app on GitHub Pages, which is a way that you can host your site so other people can get to it. GitHub allows you to host one thing for free, which is pretty cool. I personally have a portfolio website on my personal site, but everyone can do something with theirs. So we'll get some practice learning about what GitHub Pages is and how to use it. I'm going to pre-link a bunch of things for you guys, and I will put them in the Zoom chat. Oops, that's what I did. Copy link. Link. There. All right, so these are the three things that we're going to be using over the next hour or so. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to clear out my terminal and let us head into our copy of our shopping app that we're working on. You should also feel free, if you want, to follow along with your to-do list app, your homework assignment. You could also do this with your homework assignment. That would be a great thing. I'm going to do it with this project that we started on last week and we'll continue working on next week. That we're just going to implement different features that cover different React concepts that we're learning each week. So I'm going to take this and host this. But you guys all have a to-do list application. That would be another great thing that you could practice with. The steps should be exactly the same, and we'll point out in individual cases where things will be a little bit different. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this out since that's a little bit cheating. I'm going to take out any of the other scripts that I forgot to remove. That one I forgot to remove. That one I forgot to remove. That one I forgot to remove. All right. Oops, and that. All right, so we're starting fresh. This is a React application that everyone should have at this point. This is just the basic Vite configuration and a bunch of stuff that we've started writing over here. So last week we created a table that displays a list of different products and a search bar where you can type into the search bar and it will control what's currently in there, and then you can search for a specific product. We didn't quite finish that, so there's a tiny bit of extra code that I just went ahead and finished offline. But if I run this with my run deb script and open this in the browser, this is what it looks like. We have a list of products. I've duplicated them over and over. We only have 2 products in here, but I think I put them in here like 10 times each. So you have like 20 products. And I can search for mini and it will only show things that have mini in the title. And I can search for suit and I can search for lamp and so on and so forth. So this is what it does so far. Not anything super crazy, but you'll notice that this application is running on localhost. Localhost means it's running on your machine. And this is a port number. A port number, ports are ways that we expose network traffic coming in and out of a particular application. So you can expose a particular port number, and then anyone who wants to connect to your application can go to the domain wherever your device is linked to, and then this port number. Right now, you could not just connect to my personal laptop on this port number and get into this application. There's lots of stuff under the scenes that would have to be set up to do that. But if you were, what we want to do is we want to host this on a different server somewhere in the cloud that we don't have to manage. We don't have to set it up so that it accepts people connecting from other places in the world and managing all of that crazy networking stuff. We just want someone else's computer in the cloud, probably Google or Microsoft or Amazon, one of their computing services. And we just want it to run our application and expose a URL where we can get to it at any moment in time. And ideally, by the end of today, I can connect to it, you can connect to it, anyone can connect to it. And that's the goal. We're also going to set up a couple of nice to have features so that you don't always have to manually upload your code once you have new things written. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's kind of like a concept of continuous integration, which we'll talk about. Okay, so what we're going to use is the very first link that I sent to you guys. There's a little bit of reading in here about GitHub Pages, but long story short, you can use GitHub Pages to host a website. You do not want to host like a whole business on here. They have a disclaimer somewhere in here, but GitHub allows you to hold a static site and serve that to other people in the world. React, the way we run it with Vite on our computer, is not a static site. Vite creates a server that can sort of compile your React code on the fly and sort of, serve you your application so that you can connect to it through this localhost thing. But React code by itself, this is not real HTML and JavaScript. This is what React has defined to be how they're going to handle layouts. So this code, before we would be able to run this, needs to be compiled into a real HTML, JavaScript, and CSS website. Vanilla, that's what React is for. You write all of this code in a syntax that's much more agreeable and has a bunch of rules that help you out with all of the React elements. And then eventually, once we're finished, we build that into a static website, static meaning just JavaScript, HTML, CSS, nothing's changing. We're not updating anything. When I go to a specific URL in my browser, it's just going to download those static files to my computer and it's going to run them. And that's what I see when I go to a website in my browser. Right now, we don't actually have that, but what Vite does is it gives us a script in here, this build script. If I run this build script, you're going to see that Vite is building for production, which means that it creates an index.html in this dist directory, which probably stands for distribution. And it creates the CSS file that has all of the different styles that I put into my React application. And it has this JavaScript file. And I can go up here in my disk section and see all of those things. This is an icon that I downloaded to go in the bar at the top of my website. Up here, it doesn't actually show, but it will show eventually. And we have our index.html, which looks pretty normal. Nothing crazy going on in here. And our CSS file, which is all condensed into one line. But if I hit save, you'll see that this is fairly normal CSS. What's going to be really scary is this JavaScript that we're about to open. So this is like just so unbelievably much JavaScript, but this is our entire website. All the React code that we wrote boiled down into vanilla JavaScript. So all the crazy React stuff like state and props, those don't exist in real JavaScript, but React has a way of turning those concepts into real JavaScript that does the same thing that you're expecting it to. So I don't think that I will be able to, let me do this again. npm run build. I don't think that it's going to allow me to just open this in my browser, but I'm going to try it just for fun. So this is CT. Actually, let me do this. Reveal in Finder index.html. Yeah, so this does not quite work as it stands, because it's not letting me open these other files that are really important to make this work. And these paths are not correct. This file does not exist. There is no assets directory at the top of my device, so I'll have to fix that at some point. But eventually, when we build this, it does turn into real JavaScript that works, and we'll be able to go from there. I think maybe I can do this, though. This might work. Oops. Let's try this. Not optimistic that this is going to work. Yeah, still no on this one. That's okay. Eventually, this is going to work, though, because we're going to put it on GitHub Pages, and GitHub Pages is going to control all of those different files that need to be loaded together and make sure that they're pointing in the right direction. So here's the workflow. We're going to take our code, our React code, we're going to build it, turn it into these assets, and then we're going to push those assets to GitHub in a specific way that allows us to have a GitHub page which has a URL that we can go to and everyone can access at the same time. So let's do that. We're going to start as they tell us to start, where your GitHub page is a repository that's named in a very specific way. So you create a new repository, and we can assign an owner, which will be ourself. And then we have to name the repository your GitHub username.github.io, which GitHub automatically recognizes as you're trying to make a GitHub Pages site. Or if you have an organization, a GitHub organization, then you can create one GitHub page per organization. I already have a user GitHub Pages that I'm using currently, and so I'm going to create an organization to do this, but feel free, if you're following along, to just use your basic username. So I'm going to start by creating a new organization up here. Create a free organization, and we'll call this Hawk Shopping Platform. team. Contact is going to be me. And it will belong to me. And we're going to solve a CAPTCHA puzzle. And we're not going to accept GitHub Copilot because we do not need that. Cool. So I have an organization here called this, and we're going to create a repository inside of this organization. And the naming structure is the name of our organization or user.github.io. So this needs to be called Hawk Shopping Platform Team at github.io. And it needs to be public, so it cannot be private. And we're going to start with a README file and hit create repository. Cool. So it's going to look pretty normal for now. Eventually, our test should be that if we go to the name of this repository, if we go to that URL, we should see at least a white screen indicating that there is something there. It's just not working. And eventually it'll be an actual application. But right now, it hasn't recognized it's there, which is okay. So if I go up into my settings here and I look on the left side under code and automation, there's a pages tab. And in this pages tab, you're going to see that it has some configuration out here already. And now it works. One thing to note is that it usually does take a minute or two when you push updates for them to actually be shown on your page. But because we have a README in our repository, it will show the README as the default for this site so that you know that it's actually working. And eventually we're going to do some other stuff. We're going to change this configuration such that it doesn't do that. The other thing about GitHub Pages is it gives you a somewhat nice URL. If you try and host a application in like Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, a lot of times they'll give you like a garbage URL that has like way too many numbers and characters for it to be a real URL. And so if you really want to use it and give it to other people so that they can come to your site, you need to register a domain name, which can be anything you want, that is much shorter and catchier and describes your business or your application and stuff like that. GitHub, it's not great because it's like a very strict format. But if you're creating like a personal portfolio application, which is what I did on my personal site, then this being the name, like your username.github.io, that's pretty natural. And if you decide that this URL still isn't correct for you, then you can register a custom domain. You do have to pay for a custom domain from a site like, I don't even remember what mine is hosted by, but you can find a bunch of sites where you can buy from Namecheap, name.com, Google Domains, stuff like that. And you can purchase a domain name and then set it up with your GitHub page down here. But we're not going to do any of that. All right, so let's do this one of two ways first. The first way that we're going to do this is we're going to take our React application and we're going to use a NPM package such that anytime I run a command, a specific command, it will build my application and it will deploy it to my GitHub Pages site. And then after that, we'll do it a different way that's a little bit more complicated, but gives you some extra benefits. And we'll talk about why you might want to do that as well. But we'll do this the manual way first. Okay, so let's move on to the next link I sent you, which is this GitHub Pages NPM package. So this package is some code that other people have written in JavaScript that handles all of the complicated parts of deploying your site to GitHub Pages. So what we're going to do first is we're going to install that package using npm I for install. And this is a package that we're only going to use to get our code into our GitHub Pages environment. It has nothing to do with the actual like runtime effect of my code. My code does not require GitHub Pages, this package, in order to function like it does with the React libraries. So therefore, I'm going to install this as a dev dependency, which means it only exists like locally when you're developing your project. And when we build this for production, it will not be included since we don't need it. So we'll do this, it'll install it. You'll probably see something here that says added a few packages, which will be GitHub Pages and the dependencies. All right, let's figure this out really quick. And we'll notice on this npm package that there's a couple different ways we can use this. We can use this as a package that we actually import into our JavaScript code, and then we can write a script that runs the GitHub Pages library and does some stuff with it. We're not going to do this just because we don't really need that. That's kind of overkill for our purposes. Rather, what we're going to do, if we scroll down here to the bottom, we can also use this as a command line utility, which means that we can use it in our scripts, in our node scripts, and deploy it from there. So you notice that Vite gives us a bunch of scripts by default. I think there's one more in here that I got rid of called test. I don't have any tests in my application yet, so I got rid of it, but we'll leave it in there for now. Not yet implemented. And I can run npm dev, npm build, npm run test, npm run lint, npm run preview, and it will execute these command line commands to do the thing that I want them to do. We can add a bunch more if we want. We can add foo is equal to echo bar. And when I run this, npm run foo, it will execute this script, which just prints bar to the console. Doesn't do anything particularly exciting. And that's okay. We can do some other really cool stuff though. Good question. I got a question about how to add a comma to the end of the line without moving your cursor. This will be a little different on Windows if you're using Windows, but on a Mac, holding Control and Command allows you to skip a lot of the line. So normally if I just hit an arrow, I have to scroll all the way over. If I hold Command and then hit an arrow key, it automatically takes me to the end of the line. And I can also go to the front of the line, same way. If I hit Control instead, sorry, not Control, Option on my keyboard, then it skips one word at a time. Just some shortcuts that are pretty helpful. I guess if you hold Option, go up and down, it'll drag that line up and down. I don't use that one very often at all. And then Command up and down takes you to the beginning and the end of the file. Just some shortcuts that can help you if you're typing in a file. I think they are pretty useful just from a speed perspective. All right, so we have this script. This script is useless. It doesn't do anything. To delete the whole line, I'm going to go to the end of the line and then hit Command and backspace. On Windows, I think you can do Control and backspace and it does one word at a time. I'm not sure how you do the whole line. If someone figures it out, feel free to leave it in the chat for other people. We're going to add a couple of other scripts in here. So Vite build, that works. It builds it to our dist folder. It creates all the files that we want. We probably want to have a script in here that typically is called clean, which takes everything that's currently in there and takes it out. So I'm going to use a command that only exists on Mac and Linux. If you try and do this on Windows, it probably will not work. I think you might have to find the equivalent Windows command for this. But rm removes a file, like it completely deletes it. You cannot recover it from your trash folder. It's just gone. So be careful. And we're going to remove with the -r flag, which means recursive. So if I do -r, it means I'm giving a folder and I want you to delete everything in that folder. I want you to delete everything inside of dist. And oftentimes this will give a prompt if you just do -r, but we want this to happen automatically. I don't want to be prompted. I just want to be able to run the script and it'll do it. So I'm going to add an F here, which is the force flag. This is equivalent to this. They mean the same thing. This is two different flags, but when you have just a single dash, then you can combine them into one argument here. So this will remove this whole folder forcefully. That's what this command does. I want to delete everything inside of dist because if I build my application, I trust that Vite will probably know that it needs to replace all the folders in there. But it's not necessarily guaranteed. Typically, what I want when I build my code, I want to start from scratch and build the entire thing. I don't want to just build whatever fraction of my application I'm building and then replace whatever was currently there if there's any duplicates, because that will leave some extra files in there possibly that did not get built, and I don't want to have those in here. Maybe this is an old file that I'm no longer using anymore. So let's say I have in my public folder this icon.svg, and I npm run build. Inside of my dist folder, I get my assets, which is CSS and JS, and I have my icon from my public folder and my index. Now let's say I swap this out and I called this other icon.svg. Instead of being white, we're going to make this red. Now, if I do npm run build again, in this case, Vite is smart enough to know, well, I want to take out my initial icon. I want you to delete it and just keep what's in there. But generally, it's pretty safe to remove everything that's currently built, clean it out, and then start from scratch. You don't want any files that were previously used and got built, but aren't being built in the most recent copy because they've been removed. You don't want them to stay there. You don't want anything to potentially interfere. If we clean everything out, we know that everything that builds is going to be what's in our dist folder. So in this particular case, I do think Vite is smart enough that we don't need to do this, but I would say it's good practice, and so we're going to do it. So let's go back. Um, too many things on my screen, sorry. Let's go back into our package.json. We have our clean. So if we do npm run build, we see that we have a bunch of stuff in our dist. Npm run clean should get rid of that dist folder. Now I can do npm run build again, and it'll put it back in there. Another way we could do this, I think, is instead of -r, we could do dist/star. -rf. Cool. And what this does is it takes everything out of dist, but leaves the dist folder, which I think we should leave that in there, just to indicate that that's where everything builds. One thing to note is in our Git ignore from creating our Vite application, it has added these two folders for us to be ignored. So the first time you commit your code to your source repository, nothing in your node modules or your dist folder will be committed to GitHub, which is intentional. We don't want our built code to be part of our GitHub repository because every time it rebuilds, it's going to change. And it's going to have to force us to recommit and download the new commits and stuff like that. We want our code to build separately from our repository. Our repository in general, with some exceptions, should hold just the code that you've written that defines your application. And we want to build it somewhere else and then deploy it to whatever environment you're running your code directly. You don't want to do that from GitHub. So that's why our dist folder is in here. We don't want to commit any of our build stuff and node modules because this is all of our JavaScript libraries and those are enormous and we cannot have the space for that in a repository. All right, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to write some code. So we have our clean, we have our build, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a deploy script, and we're going to make this a compound script. So we're going to npm run clean and npm run build, and then we're going to GitHub Pages our dist folder. So this GitHub Pages command, if I've done this right, I'm not 100% sure. I may have messed this up a little bit. This is using our repository. Oops, I did do it wrong. This is what the documentation for the package says to do, so that's what I'm going to do. This package will control all the stuff behind the scenes, but it will take whatever's in our dist directory at the time. So we have to build first so that there's something in there locally. And then it will push this code to your origin remote by default. So I have my git remotes. Ignore this other one for now, but we have our origin remote, which all of you guys should have because when we do git push origin master, we're pushing our master branch to whatever remote is called origin. Origin is usually just the GitHub repository that's housing all of your code. So I would push my branch up to this repository. And by default, that's where it's going to push it. So I'm going to update this to be this, this repository that I created instead of my other one. If you have, if you're using your to-do app, but you want to push it to another repository. So like if you have your to-do app and you've stored that somewhere on your computer and you've created a separate repository that has your GitHub username.github.io, Well, we want our to-do app to be the source of all of our code, and then we just want this to be the house of the stuff that's getting deployed, uh, our built application. And we can do that. Um, this package has been so kind as to let us do that. Um, and so we can do that. Down here, there's uh, somewhere in here, there's a section. Yeah, so there's a repo option that lets us push to a different repository instead of whatever's our origin. So my origin is this shopping app repository, but I want to push it to this GitHub Pages repository that I created. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to modify our script a little bit more and give it a -r flag, and then the name of the repository we're pushing to. This is a really long command. I'm actually going to split this up. I changed my mind. So I'm going to leave this first half as pre-deploy, which means run before I deploy my code. And then we're going to create a separate deploy script that runs GitHub Pages. I turn this off. This is really annoying. So pre-deploy cleans and then builds my code. And when I run the deploy script, it will first run my pre-deploy script, and then it will do GitHub Pages, all this other stuff. So let's see the magic. Let's see it in action. I'm going to open my terminal down here and run deploy. That was fast. So it executed all these commands in the order that I would expect. So it ran my pre-deploy first, so it cleaned it out, and then it rebuilt my code. And this is the clean command, and then this is the build command. And then after it did those, it ran GitHub Pages to publish to this other repository. And so now you'll see that it has pushes as of 1 second ago. If I refresh my page and I go into my GitHub Pages branch, which was just created, this is where all of my build materials show up. Just realizing that this icon is not going to work. I renamed it to be other icon, but in my index.html, I did not rename it. I just have it as icon.svg. So I'm going to name this back. And we'll npm run deploy one more time. So it'll clean it all out. It'll rebuild with icon.svg. Now, if I refresh my page, my icon is fixed. Cool. So typically with GitHub Pages, you'll create a branch that has all of your build contents in it. And this is what's actually going to get deployed on your site. Your GitHub Pages site looks for an index.html file where it can load up your website, or it looks for a README file, which is what it was initially over here. Right now, if I go into my settings and go down to pages, you'll see that it's deploying from a branch, which is what we want, but it's deploying from our main branch, which means whatever's in the main branch is what's going to show up. And there's nothing in there. All my stuff is in my GitHub Pages, which is intentional. It creates a separate branch so that you could put these in the same repository if you want. So I'm going to deploy from my GitHub Pages branch instead. And we're going to visit the site, and we're going to give it like a minute or so to update because it's going to take some time. We're just going to frantically refresh the page until then. No, GitHub Pages does always take a while. It's just enough time to be concerning. and make me nervous, and it'll fix itself. Sweet. That was really easy, actually. Normally it's a lot more difficult. So in the end, after a few seconds, when I go into my page, which sometimes your browser is just going to cache the old version of the page for a while. But eventually you will see either the actual application that you have that you can use, your to-do app, or you'll see a white screen that has a bunch of errors in the console. And when you have errors in the console, then you'll have to work through. One thing that I remember having to do when I tried working on this last night that for some reason I don't seem to have to do today, and I don't fully understand that, is add a base property to my Vite config. What ended up happening was I would build my application and deploy it, and then I would get just a white screen of death and a bunch of scary errors in the console that were saying like that my JavaScript file or my CSS file either like wasn't valid or it couldn't access it or it was not available. And the reasoning was because when Vite tries to build your your application and generate all these files, it has to know how to link these together. Your index.html pulls in your icon.svg, your assets, your JavaScript, and your CSS. And so it needs to be able to generate these URLs, not these URLs, these paths in order to get to these files. And then when your index.html gets served up, when I go to this URL, if those paths aren't correct, then you're just going to get a white screen because it can't actually find any of the JavaScript that like turns your application into a React application. By default, this index.html does absolutely nothing. It's completely white. It has no CSS. It has no JavaScript. The JavaScript adds literally your entire application. React is fully JavaScript. It just puts in elements, it takes them out automatically with JavaScript. And then your CSS is what makes those look like you would expect. Is anyone having any issues so far with this GitHub Pages package? Any errors that you guys are running into? I expect there should be lots. I had a lot of issues to work through yesterday. Okay. If there are any errors, feel free to leave them in the chat or to send them to me as a DM after the session is over. That's also fine. Cool. So we have our script. Our script works. I can make any changes I want. In the case of your homework assignments, that's, create a branch, do your assignment, merge in it to your master branch or your main branch, whichever you use. And now you have new features in your master branch. Well, when that happens, then you'll have to yourself run this deploy script every time in order to push your code up to your page, which is kind of cumbersome. I don't want to have to do that myself. I would like for any time my master branch gets new commits, it just automatically does that for me. And this is what the concept of continuous integration and continuous deployment refers to. Continuous integration is constantly building and testing your code every time that there's changes to it. Like every time I put a commit in my master branch, I want some system to run all of my tests and make sure they work. And if that works, then I want to build my application into a binary file or into a website or whatever application you're running, whatever the format is. And then continuous deployment means every time I've built a new version of my application in whatever format that is, I'm going to update my runtime environment where my application lives so that it's constantly getting updates. If you think about like a phone app, you get updates for your app like probably once a month, maybe even more than that. That's just the way that apps work in general. But a lot of times things on the web don't work that way. And things your um, in your eventual career in software engineering will not work that way. There's lots and lots of benefits to deploying all the time, constantly pushing new code up into your testing environment and then eventually into your production environment. You'll catch bugs really early. If I write code for a month and then push all of that code at once, if there's a bug, I won't really know until everyone starts using it a month after I wrote it. And that's really obnoxious to try and track down because you've probably written a lot of code in that month. Whereas if you're constantly deploying your code, then when I write a bug, that bug gets immediately pushed into my testing environment and I can find that ideally like less than a couple days and snuff that out really quick. And so what we'd like to do here is we would like to take that concept of continuous integration where every time I push new code to my repository, it should just build it for me. I don't have to want to remember to run the script and figure out where it needs to go. It should just do that automatically. And then continuous deployment, once I build that, well, I want to push it into my GitHub Pages environment so that my application is updated. So we have a script to do that, but we can do this smarter actually. So let's do this. The last link that I sent you, I don't know if we're gonna have time to do a whole lot of this, but we can at least start looking at it, is this GitHub Pages action. So GitHub and lots of other platforms support CI and CD. GitHub does it through what they call workflows. So if I go into my code and then go up here into actions, this is already sort of populated for me because under the hood, that's what the GitHub Pages package is doing. There's a lot of steps under the hood, but essentially what it does is it builds my code and then it deploys my code to the page and then it reports that the build was successful. And this is a workflow. This is a bunch of different steps that execute different pieces of code and eventually that will deploy my application. But we can add other actions if we want to. We don't have to limit ourselves to just what they give us. We can create a new workflow up here. And one that we can use to run our code is one that calls this script or does something similar like this. So I can create a workflow. There's one for Node.js. There's not one in this recommended section for React, although I think we could find one if we looked. Yeah, this is a workflow that exists and we could use this if we want to. We're not going to use this one though, because I haven't tested this one personally. We're going to stick with just our Node.js and then we're going to add some stuff from there. And what this will do is it will create a .github /workflows folder in our project, and it will create a workflow configuration file. This is a YAML file, we say YAML. Sometimes you'll see it YAML or YML. Those are exactly the same thing. And it's just a bunch of key value pairs and nested keys that just define a bunch of different properties. And then whatever is reading that configuration can say, I'm expecting the on.push.branches property, and then it will read it from this on push branches. So I'm going to rename this and we'll call this deploy.yml. That'll be the name of our workflow. And we're going to leave pretty much all of this on here. So branches, we're going to say when we push to our main branch, we're going to run this. This down here is saying when we create a pull request onto our main branch, we're also going to run this, which I am not going to do here. I'm going to take this out. That is a cool thing you can do. You can say, when I create a merge request, run all of my tests to make sure that merge request is okay before I merge my code, which is a great thing to do. You absolutely should do that once you have tests. But for now, because this is going to deploy, we only want to do that when we have a full new commit. So there's lots of stuff up here. Jobs. This is a job called build, and it runs on Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution. And it's going to run with all these different node versions. I'm going to take out all of these except one, so that it only runs once with node 18. And it's going to execute all these steps. So it's going to use node.js, and it's going to do npm CI, which is like npm install, but specifically for when you're building for production. So we will generally use CI for like a workflow or something automatic. And then if you're just installing on your laptop, you use npm I. And then we run npm run build, and we test everything. I'm going to swap this. I think we should test before we build, just to make sure we know it works. And we're going to go into this other workflow that I linked for you, Actions GitHub Pages. This is a workflow someone has created that can just push to a GitHub Pages site for us. And it just gives us the name of a step that we need to use, which I'm just going to copy and paste in here. Make sure I got the indentation correct here. I did not. There we go. Indentation is really important in a YAML file. Everything has to be one level from what it was. So what I'm saying here is take this workflow that someone else has created that will automatically push to GitHub Pages and publish my dist directory. This is a secret token that's created along with your workflow, so I don't have to do anything here. But this just authenticates us so that our workflow can push to its own repository. Otherwise, we're going to run into a permission error. We do actually have to add permissions up here. And our content permission is going to be, we're allowed to write. I only know about this because I ran into this issue after a lot of Googling. This is the solution. Okay. So this is a lot of talking and a lot of magic, but let's commit this and see the magic. And we're going to commit directly into the main branch, which just puts this workflow into our main branch. And you'll see now that there's a yellow dot up here. That means it's going to run our workflow. And if I go into details, it's going to show me all these things. So what I'm noticing is that there's nothing in the main branch right now. It's trying to build a node project, but there is no node project here. There's no package.json. So I need to push all of my stuff into the main branch here so that it knows to then build it into my GitHub Pages branch, which kind of breaks the system that we had originally where we're using our to-do app and then we're pushing it to our GitHub Pages repository. In this case, our workflow only really makes sense if we have code in this repository that we then want to push to a different branch. We could, I think, configure this so that it pushes to a different repository. I think there's probably some instructions in here to do that, but to keep things simple, I'm not going to. Here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to go into my project and we're going to git remote add deploy repo and give it the URL of this repository that we've been secretly pushing to. We're going to git pull. This is masked. This is main. This is going to be annoying. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend just for a second that our repository is called, has a main branch. My Git is set up to use master as the default, whereas this repository has main, which is kind of annoying. So I'm going to git pull deploy repo main. All right. So this is all stuff that's changed. We have our GitHub workflow and all these other files. I'm going to git commit, set up workflow, and I'm going to git push to my deploy repo, push my main branch. And I have to do -f, which just says whatever's currently in here, overwrite it. And now I have my full React app in here. And it also should have my workflow in here, although I'm not convinced that it does. Oh, damn it. I just deleted it. All right, I'm just going to copy from a different project or a different branch of this just for speed. All right, so this is basically all the stuff that we just wrote. Just from a different branch that I was experimenting with last night. This is all the same stuff. I think I accidentally deleted it somehow. I don't really know how I did that. We get push, play repo, and Now if we go in here and refresh, we should see the yellow dot. Unless I fucked it up again. I think I did. What am I missing? .github workflows .ym. All right, guys. All right, long story short, this is supposed to recognize that I have GitHub workflows and it's not doing it. I don't know. All right, we're over time, so I'm not gonna hold this any longer. But eventually what should happen here is when we push to our main branch, our GitHub workflow will identify that we pushed to, oh, it's because it's master. Hold on. I said I was gonna let you guys go, but I just fixed it. It needs to be main here since we're on our main branch. It's not detecting that I pushed the master branch because I didn't. I pushed my main branch. All right, maybe this time. Sweet, we got our yellow dot, which means the workflow got recognized. And I can watch this go through all the steps. We have a GitHub token up there. It's using Node. It's going to do all these things. It's going to install my packages. This one will probably take a little while. There's no tests, not yet. And it's going to build all my stuff. And then it's going to deploy to GitHub Pages. I mess up the permissions. Add in here. All right. So I gotta make sure that my bot here that's running all of this is allowed to actually write to this repository so that it can write to my GitHub Pages branch, which is something that I put in there and then got removed when I accidentally deleted my workflow. All right, this one I think is gonna work. One thing to note about setting up workflows like this is the first time that you set it up, it's going to make your life miserable. You're going to be like the most unhappy person. You're going to hate your job. But once you get a workflow that works, you'll generally not have to touch it for a while. It's going to be the greatest thing in the world. So don't get discouraged if it's really hard. Like I've done a lot of this and I still managed to mess this up a lot. All right. It deployed, it did all the stuff. If I go into my GitHub Pages branch, we should see we committed just now. And if I go into my pages, I visit my site, it's going to look exactly the same because we didn't make any changes, but all of our updated code will be in here now and it will deploy. So anytime that I push to that branch, anytime I merge in a merge request, it will automatically build and redeploy to my site, which is awesome. All right, that's all I got. If there's any questions, I'm happy to stay after as long as you want. Otherwise, thanks for being here. I'm sorry for just talking to you for an hour. I'll try and make it more interactive next week. But this one I just kind of had to run quickly. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you guys.
Thank you so much. So helpful information.
Thank you, Eli. Have a good weekend also.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Have a good weekend.